Hey everyone, it's Tom here from thisonlineworld.com. I hope you're having a fantastic day today. I'm super excited. We have a new camera, new microphone, new lighting setup. We really went all out this month with the previous month's YouTube revenue, so I'm pretty excited to make more videos. Now, I think it's safe to say that there's not many cheap things you can buy that can actually change your life. I mean, you could buy an education, you can buy online courses, you can buy mentorship programs, but those can be pretty expensive. So one of the main reasons I love reading is just the simple fact that for $10 or $20 or however much it costs you to buy a book, you can consume information that potentially changes the rest of your life, and I think that's pretty cool. Now, I've gotten back into reading recently. I used to love reading, but school kind of ruined that for me. I've been on a personal finance binge, so today we're gonna be looking at 5 of the best finance books that you should read, especially if you're a young adult. Each book in this list is gonna be on a slightly different area of personal finance, and I'm even gonna throw in a bonus book that has nothing to do with personal finance, at least on the surface, but it's a book that really changed my life, and if there's one book I think you should read, it's definitely that one. So yeah, without further ado, let's get into the video. All right, so starting off, I'm gonna ask a few questions and we'll just see if you get them, so think them in your head. How much do you think the average millionaire spends on a suit? Like a very nice tailored suit. $1,000, $5,000, $10,000? On average, what do you think? The answer is actually closer to about $200 to $300 on average. Another question, what percentage of millionaires in America do you think inherited their wealth versus millionaires who are first generation rich? You'll probably think it's something like 90% of millionaires inherit their wealth, when in fact, 80% of millionaires in America are first generation millionaires and built their wealth themselves. Why am I talking about millionaires? Well, it's because the first book on the list of the best finance books that you need to read is called The Millionaire Next Door. So this book basically dives into the demographics and makeup of America's millionaires and looks at the factors that they all have in common and what makes them wealthy. The book is written by Thomas J. Stanley and William D. Danko. And what's really cool about this book is the authors actually profiled and conducted a bunch of surveys with, hundreds or thousands of millionaires in America and across the world to learn more about the characteristics that they had in common. The book was written in 1996, and some of the studies and surveys they did actually were from before that, but it's shocking that even though this book has aged, the trends are still the same and the characteristics that these millionaires have in common remain unchanged. So basically the book breaks down 2 different groups: under accumulators of wealth and prodigious accumulators of wealth. So an under accumulator of wealth is essentially a household where they have a great income, they're making maybe 6 figures or close to that, but based on their age, they're not at the net worth they should be at. In contrast, a prodigious accumulator of wealth is similarly another household that has a decent income, but their net worth is much higher than you would expect based on their income level and their age. And so essentially the book tackles different categories of spending, like luxury goods, cars, credit cards, how they invest. And time again, you learn the trends that make somebody an under accumulator of wealth and the trends that make someone a prodigious accumulator of wealth. I think this book is a great general first read because it highlights some foundational practices that, on average, wealthy people in this world stick to. It's sort of like a 101 on foundations of wealth building, like live within your means, don't showboat, don't splurge all of your paycheck on luxury goods, invest, be frugal. I also like that the book stresses time and time again that most millionaires are first generation rich. It kind of dismisses this concept that you can't build wealth on your own and you need to inherit it, and that you need a handout if you want to get ahead. So if you want a glimpse into the lives of America's wealthiest households and what makes them become wealthy in the first place, I highly recommend giving The Millionaire Next Door a read. The second book on the list of the best personal finance books you should read is called Biology. So it's called Biology, not like your high school biology textbook that you don't actually want to open. This one is called Biology, The Truths and Lie About Why We Buy. So my sister actually got me this for Christmas, and it's actually one of my favorite personal finance books because as someone who studies psych, it's nice to read a book that highlights psychological aspects of human behavior and how marketers and advertising companies take advantage of those facts. So really, this book is about teaching you how to think like an advertiser and to recognize some of the common pitfalls and traps that we fall into as consumers. The book's written by Martin Lindstrom, and it was written in 2008, but it's been a New York Times bestseller and won a bunch of awards. And even though it might seem like 2008 was a long time ago and advertising has changed dramatically and it's way more online than it was back then, these same principles apply to this day, and I think the studies that were conducted in this book are definitely worth reading. Lindstrom and his team actually conducted real-life experiments with, EEG and fMRI imaging. So they'd get consumers into these research groups and they would monitor their brain activities when they saw different advertisement material or commercials. And so essentially the entire book breaks down different marketing tactics like slogans, jingles, commercials, celebrity endorsements, and looks at what's effective, what's not effective, and how that ultimately impacts consumers. Definitely some cool psychological studies in there, and it all relates to how advertisers get you to spend your money. So I think it's a bit more of like a defensive personal finance book you can read, so you understand what tricks are being used and maybe you can spot them next time and your wallet will be better off for it. All right, so book number 3 on the list of the best finance books you need to read is called The 4-Hour Workweek. So this book is about escaping the 9-to-5, living anywhere, and joining the new rich. It was written by Timothy Ferriss, and this book has essentially become the sort of Bible or go-to resource that's quoted all the time about this idea of becoming financially independent and living a more flexible life where you essentially travel, you work from your laptop, you're kind of a digital nomad, and you live like the new rich, i.e. a millionaire, without actually having to be a millionaire. So he actually wrote the book while he was on a sabbatical from a very intense corporate job. It's essentially a blueprint for how you can go from working a full-time corporate job to having a lifestyle that is much more flexible, has a better work-life balance, and gives you the freedom to travel or to spend time with family or to really do what you want to do. I think this book is a little bit of brain candy in the sense that it stresses this awesome lifestyle and that's the focus of the book, but in reality it'll probably take a few years for anybody to work up to this kind of lifestyle. But I still wanted to include it on this list of best personal finance books to read because it really makes you question alternative lifestyles and the actual blueprint you can use to work towards that. So for me, this book was pretty impactful because it really made me start to think about diversifying my income and getting multiple irons in the fire. It wasn't the reason I started blogging or started YouTubing, but it definitely was a factor. And I think, again, it might take you years to get there, but hey, maybe you start a YouTube channel yourself, or maybe you start a blog, or you start an online business or some kind of side hustle, and that's part of your blueprint to becoming more financially free and living the life that you really want to live. Not to say that there's anything wrong with the 9-to-5 life. I think 9-to-5 jobs are awesome, but it's just another tool you can keep in your back pocket, and it's always nice to think about new ideas, so definitely recommend checking this book out. So the 4th book on the list of best finance books that you need to read was actually published in 1949, but it's an awesome book, and it is called The Intelligent Investor. So this is the definitive book on value investing, and it was written by Benjamin Graham. And there's actually a quote here on the front cover. It says, "By far the best book on investing ever written," and guess who that quote is from? It is from Warren Buffett. And value investing is definitely an interesting topic to read about. Value investing is essentially buying something that is underpriced for whatever reason in the given market, and you're projecting for long-term growth. That's kind of a botched explanation, but I'm gonna post up a little definition for you to read as well. The reason I'm including this book on the list of best finance books is I think it's kind of one of those investment classic reads that if you're trying to learn more about investment and one of the key lines of thinking in the world of investing, it's definitely a must-read book. There's kind of 3 main takeaways from this book, or 3 lessons that Graham imparts. The first being to always analyze for the long term, protect yourself from losses, and don't chase profits. The second point, and Graham kind of uses this character, this analogy, is called Mr. Market. And essentially Mr. Market's always coming in and he wants to buy things that day and chase short-term profits, and he doesn't really project into the future. So point number 2, don't be like Mr. Market, and that kind of harkens back the first point I mentioned. And then the third point that's really predominant in the book is to develop a sort of plan or formula for how you invest and to stick to it to help avoid losses. This kind of plays into the idea of not being emotional with your investments and setting rules for yourself, like I will invest this much per month, or I will pull out if I dip below this amount. Everyone's formula or structure of investing is a bit different. Ultimately, it's important to know what your investment philosophy is in the first place so you can stick to somewhat of a plan. At the end of the day, if you want to invest at some point in your life, which I think everybody should if they can, it's a must-read book. So add this one to your list of the best personal finance books to check out. All right, so the 5th book on the list of best personal finance books you need to read, it's going back to psychology a little bit, but it's called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. So this book was published in 2011 and it actually won the Nobel Prize in Economics. And this book essentially highlights decades of research on cognitive biases and how humans think and how it relates to our behavior and our happiness. The research was conducted by Kahneman and one of his associates, and it's a really cool read because he kind of bounces around different studies he was conducting. It definitely touches upon a lot of financial topics and just topics in general about about how the human mind functions and some of the pitfalls you can fall into with faulty lines of thinking. So kind of the central theory in the book is that we have two systems of thought. We have system one, which is very fast and emotional and instinctive, and that is oftentimes the line of thinking that grabs things first. The second system of thinking, system two, is much more rational and slow and logical, and that's really important for when you're making major decisions because you don't want to be emotional when you're deciding on a major life event. So essentially Kahneman gets into different lines of thinking and cognitive biases that we encounter oftentimes because system one is what's taking over. So for example, the book touches upon the idea of loss aversion, which I think is a very important personal finance concept to understand. Loss aversion is a common human tendency to prefer avoiding loss rather than seeking out gain. So for example, most people would prefer not to lose $5 than rather make $5. And this might not sound like a very important financial topic, but this level of risk aversion definitely has implications for how you live your life, and if you decide to start a business or if you decide to stray from the regular 9 to 5. There's a ton of implications and you can really dig into it, but it's another important foundational psychological element to understand. The book also highlights the idea that when making financial decisions, it's truly best to leave your emotions at home. And I think it's just an awesome read for anyone who wants to learn a bit more about psychology and how that impacts human behavior. All right, so that does it for the 5 best personal finance books I think everybody should read. But as I mentioned in the intro, I'm including one final book on this list that has nothing to do with personal finance, but it's a book that really changed my life. And I think it's a book that gets you to conceptualize the idea of wealth in a much broader perspective. So the book is called All Men Are Mortal, and it's written by Simone de Beauvoir. And this is definitely my favorite book of all time. And if there was a book I ever recommended to a young adult or anyone in general that's a must-read book in their lifetime, it's this book. So this book was actually written in 1946. Simone de Beauvoir is actually a really fascinating woman. She was a political activist, a feminist, social advocate, and she was also a major player in the school of thought called existentialism, which is a line of philosophy that essentially asks the question of why are we on this earth? What is the purpose of our existence? And it analyzes aspects of the human condition and experience to try and answer that question. So this book is complete fiction, and it looks at the life of Raymond Fosca, who was born in Renaissance Italy, and pretty early on into the novel, he discovers that he is immortal. The book is honestly an uncomfortable read because you see the elation at first of Fosca as he realizes he's immortal. And as the chapters progress, you subsequently see his agony at that same realization that he is stuck on Earth forever. As you see Fosca go through this dilemma, you as the reader ultimately do the same thing, and you kind of start to question, okay, what's my purpose of being on this earth? And why am I here? What do I want to do with the rest of my life? So the reason I mentioned this book in this list of finance books that you should read is because I think if you just read personal finance books on investing and saving money and making money, you're getting a very surface level education on what the topic of wealth really means from a broader perspective. I mean, how many stories have you heard of people who work and grind all their life and they try to amass as much money as they can, and they get old and they reach the end stage of their life and they don't feel fulfilled because they never stop to consider why they're actually doing what they do and what's the purpose of them being on this earth. Ultimately, I believe that wealth is more than just a number in your bank account. It's freedom, it's happiness, it's the flexibility to do what you want to do. And part of that all really ties into that foundational idea of figuring out what you want to do with your life. So maybe this was a little hippy dippy and maybe it shouldn't have been in this video, but this book really changed my life more than any other book I've ever read. Kind of puts you in a funk for a while, like you're kind of stressed out when you read it, but I honestly think that if you don't read a bit of philosophical work once in a while or ask these bigger questions, the concept of making more money or saving money or investing really doesn't mean that much because, again, it's all surface level and there's more to life than your bank account. Definitely recommend checking out this book and all of the other books I mentioned. I'm going to link them down in the description box, as well as an article that mentions other top personal finance books if you want to dig around a little bit more and read some of the more commonly recommended ones or foundational pieces of literature. Even if you can only afford one of the books, I think it's a great list to keep in mind, and whenever you get a little bit of spare cash, put some aside to invest into books and invest in your education in some form. It honestly can go a lot further than taking a university course, and I think it's just a good habit to get into. That about does it for this video. I'm super excited to see how it turns out because of the new camera and all the gear, and I'm just so excited to actually make more videos and for the audio issues to be fixed. So thank you guys as always for having so much patience and leaving your comments and encouragement and watching videos in the first place. It's pretty mind-blowing how the channel has grown, and I really appreciate it. As always, don't forget to leave a like, comment, and subscribe to let me know what you thought about the video, and don't don't forget to check out thisonlineworld.com for more unique ways to make and save money. I will catch you guys in the next one.